Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Chelsea Ohlemiller, and tonight I have a special guest. I have an author and a podcast host, Shelby Forsythia, and I am so excited for you guys to meet her. Some of you already know her work. Some of you will be introduced to it tonight, and so I want to welcome Shelby. And if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and welcome to my Facebook Live series.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And the first thing I can tell you about myself is that right now I'm sitting in my apartment in Chicago. So if you hear the train going overhead, that's what that sound is.
Oh, and you're not far from me in Indianapolis. So
I know it. I love, we need like a grief professionals of the Midwest meetup or something like
we
that. 'Cause
do.
there's
Yeah.
a great many that live up here in the snow. I think it's because here's another thing about myself. I love living in places with seasons because it reminds me of like the cyclical nature of grief too. I like having a winter and I like having a summer because it helps me somehow metaphorically process my own grief.
Yeah. Oh, it's so
Pretty
true.
rad.
It is.
Mhm.
And you definitely get the seasons like we do in Chicago, in Indiana.
Yes.
Yeah. So I first want to show everybody your books. And I also want to, before you tell us a little bit more about yourself, I want to tell everybody that if you have any questions at any time for Shelby or myself, just put them in the comment section. If you want to say hi, that you're here, put it in the comment section. We'll be reading those throughout our conversation and make sure to get back with everybody. Also, at the end of our chat, I will put all of Shelby's links for her books, how to purchase them, her website, how to experience her podcast, and all of those good things. And so look for that in the comment section as well. All you have to do is click, and it'll be super easy to either purchase or follow her on social media. And so before she tells us a little bit about herself, I will just show you a couple of her books, which are Permission to Grieve and then Your Grief, Your Way. They're beautiful books, both just aesthetically and for your heart and your soul. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody could see them before Shelby tells us a little bit about her story and what led you here.
Yeah. Well, I think anybody who knew me when I was younger would not tell you that I was going to be a grief professional when I grew up. They're like, that's probably not the space she's going to go into. I had what I often tell people was a very idyllic childhood. Idyllic. Um, Lived in the suburbs of North Carolina, stable family life, never really wondered where food was coming from. Piano lessons, vacations, soccer practice, all that jazz. We had a lot of cats growing up, including one who won't leave my desk. Um, and uh, and just uninterrupted. And it was kind of one of those lives where I didn't know how good I had it. I think that's something that resonates with a lot of grievers is I didn't know how good my life was until everything got overturned.
Yeah.
And then this series of events happened. I think I refer to it in Permission to Grieve as the 4 years of hell, but it was the entire time I was in college, and college really had nothing to do with it. But the components that made up what I thought was stability in my family just slowly began to unravel. It began with my dad losing his job, and so we lost financial stability there. And shortly thereafter, he was diagnosed with two brain aneurysms, one on either side of his head. They were some of the largest recorded in North Carolina, so we thought he was going to die. And watching him reckon with his own mortality was very bizarre. As like a 20, well, I was maybe 17 or 18 at the time. After that, I came out as a queer woman in the state of North Carolina in a Christian family, and that kind of went well and also kind of did not. And so there was grief and like, where am I accepted? Where are my people? Where do I belong in the midst of all of this? And soon after my dad's second surgery for his brain aneurysms and watching him recover and become a different person, because when they're in your brain, inevitably things happen to your personality. We kind of thought we were out of the woods. The casseroles would stop coming, the carpools to the hospital would end. And then my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And we were thrust back into this whirlwind of the meal trains and the phone calls and the gift cards in the mail and coordinating rides to the hospital and dealing with medical bills coming all the time. And I was in college this whole time because my parents didn't want me to quit school. And so I developed this like anxiety every time the phone rang. Every time the phone rang, I was expecting bad news. Every time I was expecting someone to die. Every time I was expecting a new diagnosis. And I vividly remember going to a movie night in college with a couple of my roommates and rushing out of the movie theater because my phone rang in my pocket and having an anxiety attack and gripping the railing outside the movie theater and just heavy breathing as I answered the phone because I saw it was my mother. And I answered and I go, "Hey mom, what's going on?" And she's like, "Oh, we just wanted to call and see how you were doing." And I in that moment I was really processing like, oh my God, I think I'm really being almost, it felt like I was being abducted. by the
Yeah.
experience of grief. And almost a little over a year after she was diagnosed, I believe, she was declared cancer free. But then in November of 2013, she had like a cold that wouldn't go away. And by the time she was admitted to the hospital, the doctors were like, there's fluid on your lungs, the cancer's come back, it's metastasized to your entire chest. We can go in, we can do surgeries, we can drain fluid, but at some point, there's no more that we can do for you. This has gotten bad enough that we can't cure you, we can only buy you time. And we got that news on December 19th of 2013. And they said, if you're planning to call in hospice, now would be the time to do so. And we had 1 week with her. She died just like in the blink of an eye, day after Christmas. And it was almost as if when she got the news that she was dying, it was as if the rest of her body just, not said yes to that necessarily, but was like, you don't have to fight this thing anymore. Like, you don't have to try to live. And there was so much grief involved with it because my mom's mom died when she was 22, and she died for me when I was 21. My sister was 19. And so she knew, having lived life after her mother died when she was in her early 20s, what she was about to
Leave you with.
leave us with, bestow upon us, burden us with, weddings without our mother, potentially children without our mother, dating, becoming friends with our mother because we were kind of clashy at the time that she died. And so having all of those experiences was something that she was grieving on our behalf as she was actively dying. And that was a surreal experience as well. And my mom's death was kind of the cherry on top of the world's worst Sunday of that 4 years of hell. It's like, that's the thing that absolutely broke me, because in her death, I lost not only my mother, but any hope of reconciliation about my queerness, my idea of a stable home and family life, my faith in God and spirituality, my belief system that like good things happen to good people and the bad guys never win, kind of the black-white duality, like if you're just good enough, good things will happen to you. A sense of trust and security, and then just like grief over my future as well. I returned to school after that, but it seemed like everything that I wanted to do, the things I wanted to major in, the plays I was directing, all these things that I was hurtling towards as I was trying to find myself as a 21-year-old and launch myself into the world, it was just like somebody took the wheels off of an airplane. And so I was just on the gravel of the runway and grounded. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this anymore, because my momentum and my desire to take off and even be in the sky it doesn't even exist anymore. It's like it felt like nothing meant anything, and yet everything meant everything all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you find, I always say, you know, like you mentioned that you're grieving the loss of your mother, but also the loss of, you know, things that aren't going to be there in your future, and the loss of so many other things. And I also felt, I was older than you. My mom was 57 and I was in my early 30s. And so I felt like a different kind of adult, like this kind of responsibility and the, you know, carefreeness, for lack of a better terminology, of the world kind of dissipated. Did you, like, I mean, being in your 20s, you know, you're experiencing a little bit different being in college and all those things, but did you feel a sense of, you know, more, you know, adulthood and more responsibilities or any of those kind of things?
Oh, interesting. I've never had this question before. I don't know that I would have phrased it in the sense that I felt like I had to grow up really fast. I mean, I think I felt like I had to grow up really fast, and that mortality became a very intimate reality for me. I thought maybe I'd lose my parents when I was like, I don't know, in my 50s, 60s. I didn't think I was going to lose at least one of them in my 20s. And so that was very jarring. And so I felt like one of my one-on-one clients phrased it the other day. She's like, I feel like I'm in on a secret. I feel like I know something about the world that my peers don't know yet. And every time I go out in public, it's like I want to tell them, but yet I know to tell them they still wouldn't understand. And yet I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but I don't want it either. And so it wasn't necessarily like I felt like I was maturing faster, but it was like everybody gets handed this box of mortality when they enter this life, but when do you actually open it? When do you recognize that everyone you love is going to die and you're going to die as well? And it was like I opened my box, before so many of my other peers did, especially going back to college, because I told them, I was grieving my mom. I was sleeping a lot more. I couldn't focus in classes. And a 21-year-old's response is like, just come to the party with us. Just come have a drink,
Right.
just whatever. And so like these things, they didn't know how to be helpful because none of them that I knew of had opened that box of mortality yet.
And some of them probably still haven't.
And some of them probably still haven't. And that's not a thing that I fault them for.
Absolutely.
And also there was this experience that I'm sure you may have had as well, because I think a lot of grievers have this, is suddenly I don't belong to the people that I used to belong to because I'm not the same person that I used to be. Absolutely. And so it's like a sudden thrusting out of every friend group, every classroom, every counseling center, every even job that you had before. Even if you don't actually leave the space or leave the people, you feel like an outsider in spaces that you used to feel comfortable in. And that was an experience that I had never had before in my life. And then suddenly I was like, even if no one knows this about me, I'm the girl in the room with the dead mom. And I had that information and I knew I was different. And and being in spaces where I had that knowledge was really jarring to me. It's not a grief I'd encountered before, the grief of not belonging. And it's one of those disenfranchised, like invisible losses. Like, yeah, I can tell people my mom died and that causes me grief and pain. But to say, I feel like I don't belong, and that also causes me grief and pain, that's a harder one for people to grip onto, I think. And yet it lives underneath it.
Oh my gosh. I just think that everything that you're saying is just, it's not that it's a profound new thing. It's just the way that you're saying it makes it so truthful and understood to those of us that have been there, even from the things that your friends have said, to you about walking around with this secret, just all of those things. And I feel like I've heard you speak like that before and tell your story because of your books and your podcast and those things. And so I'm so glad that I get to have this conversation with you, because I think, anybody that's in my audience and in my following that can hear your story and hear you speak, and the hope and the encouragement of just having someone that understands and helping us through it is such a gift. And so I'm so glad to, be here with you and be listening to this, because it's just, even after engaging with your writing and your podcast, I'm still finding things that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I have to write that down. I have to remember that later. And so I have to ask, you went through all of this at a younger age, and so how did you go from losing your mother to really not understanding what was happening to grieving to then publishing a book? What was the trajectory of that?
I'm going to start referring to this now as the lost to book pipeline, because I get this question so often, because I didn't expect it either. I didn't experience the death of my mother and be like, I'm going to make something of this someday. And I think that a lot of, if I can use this term, like veteran grievers do, because they've made something of loss, even if they didn't mean to, so many times before, that they're like, oh, there will be something made of this again. I know how to make meaning. I know how to find purpose after loss. And so people who've had, I don't necessarily want to put numbers on it, but multiple losses throughout their lifetime, they experience something else again. And they're like, something else is coming. I didn't know that was true when my mom died. So I didn't set out to, I didn't set out to be a grief professional, but B, I didn't set out to write a book either.
And I didn't figure so.
Nope, most people
because I started writing because I was writing for myself. I just needed, like you, no one had opened that box of my friends. Nobody understood what that looked like, a whole new life. And so I was just writing for myself. Never did I think that anybody would read it or resonate, because I felt, like you said, lost and kind of lonely. And so I wondered if your experience was, similar, because your book, is just such a raw truth. And so I wondered how you got there, how you got brave enough to say, okay, here's my story.
I think I essentially got mad enough, was my catalyst. In the first probably 6 to 8 months or so after my mom died, I didn't want anything to do with helpful resources, support groups, nothing. I didn't want to be a part of anything. People kept dropping books by the house when they would bring casseroles and things like that. Grateful for the casseroles, not so grateful for the books, because every time I saw one, it was just a reminder, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead. It was like this record player that was taunting me 24/7 in my brain. So every time I walked by the coffee table and there was another book about losing your mom, I was like, no, I can't. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And the one thing I knew after I graduated, I didn't want to pursue the career I wanted to do. I didn't want to interact with people that I thought I would want to interact with. I didn't have like the dreams or the goals that I wanted to have, but the one thing I knew was true is I'm going to move to Chicago. And once I got there, I was really lonely. And that was that kind of isolation combined with the energy of moving to a new place. It kind of prompted me to go out and explore. And so one of the things I did first was to get a public library card in Chicago. And I didn't know what I wanted to read. I hadn't read for fun in years because college will pound that out of you. The public school system, we love it. And so I just started walking the aisles of my local library, and I found these sections on grief and loss and how to build resilience and what to do in times of transition in your life. And I started reading all these books and taking it. I was like, oh, there's words for this. Oh, there's structures for this. Oh, there's frameworks for this. Even if they don't exactly apply to my lost story, or the person that they lost wasn't the same, or even if it was a story of a divorce or a diagnosis or something that wasn't technically a death, it still hung with me in ways that other kind of languages hadn't. I felt myself craving more depth than I ever had in my entire life. And I found it in these books and then podcasts and audiobooks and other resources. And so I just started consuming them. Like I was perpetually hungry for conversations on grief because I felt like I couldn't find them anywhere else. And every now and then I would post like quotes that I had read or concepts that I was learning on my personal Facebook. And I got enough feedback from friends and family of like, this is really helpful. I never thought about it this way, or things like that, that they're like, you should do something with this. And I remember I went to a coaching mastermind to see if that was a career or a job that I wanted to have anything to do with. And this woman crosses the room to stand in front of me after hearing me speak at the end of the workshop. And she goes, I don't know what this applies to. I'm not even sure about the work you do, but whatever it is, you need to use your voice. And I was like, okay. I was classically trained in opera until the age of 12. I have done voice performing and voice acting for much of my life. And I was like, I think I'm going to turn the things that I'm learning into a podcast. And that became the start of my podcast coming back in 2017, which kind of evolved out of doing some Facebook Live videos related to the books I was reading. And in one conversation, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then another, the guests I would have on this show, people who'd come back from death, come back from divorce, come back from diagnosis, they kept saying this phrase, I gave myself permission to grieve, or I couldn't give myself permission to grieve, or a therapist gave me permission to grieve, or a friend gave me permission to grieve. And I was like, what is this? What is this phrase?
Right.
That I keep hearing over and over again because I'd had my own permission to grieve moment years earlier when my wallet was stolen in downtown Chicago, and I finally let myself grieve the death of my mother. So weird how those things are connected.
Yep. That's
but
in
sometimes,
the book. If
yes,
you have
that's
it,
in the
if
book.
you don't
So
have
you
it,
read
it's in the book.
But sometimes it's strange how sometimes tiny things that happen can be catalysts for us grieving our biggest losses.
Yep.
Like can't find my shoes in the morning and all of a sudden I'm crying about my dad. Miss the bus and all of a sudden I'm grieving my dog who died or something like that. I have clients tell me over and over again, you're like, she was like, I broke a plate and all of a sudden I was grieving my sister who died 12 years ago. And I was like, yep, that's really normal. So somebody had stolen my wallet in downtown Chicago and all of a sudden I was grieving my mother. And the phrase that came to me was permission to grieve. And then it kept popping up again in all these podcast episodes. I was like, what is this? Why do we keep saying it? And why does no one know what it is? And so I devoted myself to studying what does it mean to give ourselves permission to grieve? And I turned that into my first book. And then a little more than a year later, not even, maybe 7 or 8 months later, I got contacted by Penguin Random House in January of last year to write a daily guidebook for grief that was not religious and that was not woo-woo, Zen, meditation, what have you, because there are many books for grief, many daily devotionals, many of them are religious, and like God can be a tricky thing with grief. And then there's a lot of like Zen and spiritual devotionals of providing visualizations and meditations and deep breath and blah, blah, blah. But there's not a lot of practical, root it down in the ground. Here's what you can do. Here's some scripts you can say. Here's some ways you can set boundaries with friends after the death of somebody you love. And so working on this project in the first, 3 months of the pandemic last year was an incredibly eye-opening experience of like, I'm pulling from the grief of my mother as I'm watching the world, maybe for the first time in my generation, collectively grieve something, a pandemic. And so that came pretty hot on the tails of Permission to Grieve. And I'm already working on my third book.
Yay!
And it's like, as soon as I opened up a way for the words to come in, they've not stopped coming. And I have, like, I don't know if you do anything like this in your writing, but I have like 8 different writing projects, and they're all in this lazy Susan, and it just keeps spinning around in my brain. And every now and then I'll just keep adding some things to other projects, and eventually they get finished one by one. But it was like a lost to book pipeline, for lack of better phrasing. And now I work with clients. I host 2 more podcasts. Like, it has just grown into a thing of grief is the work that I do in the world. And it's not work that I do. And we talked about this before we got on the call. It's not work that I do because I feel like I'm smarter or better than anybody who's grieving. It's because I was given words and frameworks, and I have words and frameworks, and those were helpful to me. And if they can be helpful to you, I would love to offer them to you. I don't feel as if I'm the expert or the authority on anyone's grief, but my experience with loss gave me insight to the universal experience of loss. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like I can speak to the fact that we all grieve individually, and grief is something that's been happening for a very long time, and it is pervasive in all of our systems and all of our structures. We know that grief is just not limited to me and what I'm feeling, but it pervades my family, it pervades my finances, it pervades my job, it pervades my relationships, it pervades the way I feed myself, the way I rest, the way I make money in the world, the way that I dream about the future, the way I plan for things that are going to happen 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Like, grief impacts everything, even politics, even the way that we vote, even who we choose to spend time with in the world. It's like, who's honoring of me and my grief? I don't know. Can they hold space for this and these parts of me? So it's a very powerful force, grief is, that I feel like people who are grievers are already attuned to, like they have that wisdom and information already, but it's also like a universal experience, like love is, but without the same reputation. And I feel like the work that you and I are doing in the world, and that so many other grief workers are doing in the world, is like, we need grief to enter conversations as often as love does.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is as an energetic force, as an impactor of our lives, as a thing that is always happening under the radar, whether we recognize it or not. It exists. For as much as love exists, so does grief. And I don't necessarily mean they're balancing and they weigh each other out, but we, at least in the United States, live in a world that's very focused on gain. But for every single thing you gain, you also lose. I work with clients who become pregnant for the first time, or are graduating, or got promoted at their place of employment. And what society sees as gain, 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 happy, 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 celebrate, 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 sometimes also has these airs of, I'm being promoted, but I'm losing my entire network of friends. I just got pregnant, and now I'm grieving the fact that I will never not be a mother ever again. I'm getting married, and I'm grieving the entirety of my single life. It's like every doorway that you cross through that you can't go back through is cause for and reason for grief. And it doesn't necessarily mean despair. It doesn't mean you're immobilized, and it's worth acknowledging the grief in the room, the loss in the room, every single time something like this happens. And so for us to only be shouting yay and only be throwing confetti and to only send, cake emojis, it's like there are other things that are also always at play. Every time we gain something, we're losing something as well. So that's a very long answer. But I feel like having these conversations about grief in the world is just so important. And I know that it's bigger than me, and I'm sheerly humbled by that every time I get to work with grieving people.
Yeah. Well, and so I want you to tell, so you work with grieving people, that's your primary, job, whether it's your podcast, but also you have, other people that I have talked to in this field would be a grief specialist or other things. And so I want you to tell everybody your title and the work that you do, because I think it is, so descriptive and so, it's just perfect for you and what you do, and kind of talk a little bit about, how people, what happens when they reach out to you and what that looks like.
Yes. Yeah. So I call myself an intuitive grief guide, and I made this title up. There's no professional association, there's no network of grief guides to my knowledge. And there's not a lot of other people in the world I've noticed who call themselves this. I've heard of other grief guides. I don't know that I've seen anybody put intuitive in front of it, but this is a phrase kind of like permission to grieve that just came to me as I was starting my business. And I was like, I want to do something with that. And essentially what it means is I work with grief, but there's kind of two facets. There's a divine dichotomy to what I do, and not divine as in God or like a religious figure, but there's almost like in nature, things are balanced. There's the guide half of everything that I do, which is the books I read. I read about 20 to 50 books on grief and loss every year. The courses that I take, the frameworks that I have, the words that I use, just the experience of working with grieving people over and over again, and the experience of my own loss. So all of this is foundational, practical, roots in the ground. I can give you steps to get you where you want to go. I can give you words to define things that you don't have words for yet. I can help you make metaphors of things that feel so abstract in grief and loss that they're confusing and paralyzing and overwhelming. So like getting unstuck is a lot of the work that I do in the guide element. And it's not because I'm better than you, and it's not because I'm smarter than you. It's just there's a library in my brain, and I really want to share it with you. The other half of that, the intuitive part, and this actually came up in another interview last week. At first, when I defined this, it was about my intuition, because sometimes during sessions, phrases will come to me, words will arrive, images or metaphors will come to me that I've never used before, and they end up being weirdly the right or most accurate thing to say to a client or in a workshop. And people are like, why? How did you know that about me? How did that resonate so much? And so there's something divine and silly and creative and trickster-like at play, as well as Elizabeth Gilbert would describe it in Big Magic. There's something magical at play.
Yep.
I remember once I was I offer free consultations for anybody that wants to work with me. You can sign up for free for 30 minutes. We'll talk about your loss. We'll talk about what I do. We'll talk about pricing and scheduling and all these other things. But I always do that for free because people don't actually know whether or not they want to work with me until they've met me. And I was doing a consultation with a man once, and I was using this metaphor of him losing his brother. And I said, so, for instance, you might feel triggered when you go to a sporting goods store to buy an ankle brace because he always helped you with your physical therapy or something like that. And he's like, pause. How did you know that? And I said, what do you mean? And he literally takes his leg and picks it up and bangs it on the desk. And he's like, I'm wearing an ankle brace right now that my brother helped me pick out because he was a sports medicine therapist.
Oh,
and his brother was the person that he lost. And I was like, these are instances. It wasn't in the notes that he sent me before our call. I didn't Google him. Like none of this happened. It was something that I drew on because I read a piece in What's Your Grief about crying in the sock aisle at Target. Yep. There was a woman who wrote a post about, I saw pink socks, and that's what I always got my mom for Christmas.
Yep, I saw that.
Crying. Yes. Okay. So you know
I've
exactly
seen it.
what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. And so I used a metaphor that was similar, but I tried my best to make it a little bit more masculine because he lost his brother, and B, sporting goods stores. I'm being a little genderist here,
right,
as a queer person, but I want to make sure that metaphors kind of can span everybody's grief experience. And somehow that was the visual that came to me. I was like, you're buying an ankle brace in a sporting goods store, and your brother helped you pick it out. And I don't know where those came from. So when I first started doing this work, I was like, there's something intuitive about the way I receive guidance from the universe, from grief as a living entity that floats around in the world. But then something else that comes up more often now is that some part of the work I do helps grieving people tap into their own intuition. Yep. And so their intuitive guidance system is like coming back on, or as one of my clients described, coming off autopilot. She's like, I don't want to sit in my house and lump around anymore. I actually feel called to do things or to make things or to think different things or to see different people or to explore kind of different paths than I wanted to, because I feel like something in me is turning back on or is pointing me towards something. Whereas before I just felt like the compass had a needle in it that was spinning around in circles. And so there's very much the practical and the deep and the roots in the ground aspect of what I do. But then there's also the internal guidance and the spiritual and the stratospheric and the magical that comes along with it. And then both of those sit under the umbrella of grief. And this is why I call myself an intuitive grief guide. I also call myself an intuitive grief guide because I'm not a therapist. I'm not a mental health professional. I cannot diagnose you any medications. I cannot clinically tell you what you are in the DSM, legally or just casually. I have no desire to do that whatsoever. And I really just want to relay to people that I work with that this corner of the market, if I can call it that, where grief intersects with intuition, this is what I know for sure. This is what I'm an expert in. This is what you will get when you work with me. You will not get any more than that, but you also won't get any less. You will get exactly that experience. So for instance, I'm not versed in other mental health things like anxiety, like depression, like OCD, like bipolar, like schizophrenia, things that can all align and intersect with grief. I don't claim to be an expert in specific losses like suicide loss or the loss of a child or loss of a sibling, because I haven't experienced those losses myself. Right. And so it's a huge grief umbrella that encompasses the practical guidance and then also the intuitive tuning in, which makes for a lot of, if I can use this word, fun and even play in sessions. We get permission to be creative within the experience of grief. And that's a really cool spot to be in, as opposed to feeling stuck or overwhelmed or lost.
Right. Well, and I love, the intuitive a guide, because for each person, it's so different. We've been handed this new map that leads to somewhere we have no idea, with detours and roadblocks and all these things that we never knew were going to be a portion of our life. And then, someone like you is there to help us, to walk beside us on the path and kind of say, here's what will help make this a little bit less of a burden to carry and give you a little bit more hope and encouragement and tools and resources. And so I think that your work is just extremely important. And, I'm excited for everybody that hasn't already experienced it to check it out, because anything, the podcast is just wonderful, and the books are just full of, like, even, I don't even think we mentioned it, but in Permission to Grieve, the entire back portion of it is resources for people that you found helped you. And so I love all of that. And I also, we didn't mention this, but Shelby's work has been featured in Huffington Post and Oprah Magazine and a million other places. And so I'm so glad and honored that she's here talking to us about this. So I know we talked a little bit, I'm going to look at the comments in just a second, because a few of them are pouring in. But I know we talked a little bit about, and both of you, you and I asked our followers to kind of give us some questions or comments or things that they really wanted to talk about. And so I know that one of those things, which I just wrote about recently and haven't really shared it yet, but is grieving the loss of ourselves and who we are and who we were, who we were before the loss, and now this person that we are now. And so how do you, what are the things that you tell somebody that would be having one of these conversations with you that says, I'm grieving the loss of my mom, but I'm also grieving me and who I used to be and who I thought I was going to become? And what do you say?
Yeah. Yes. And this was something that was definitely true for me too. I think I would probably start with, that's really normal in grief and loss, because sometimes people identify it as a thing that they're feeling or experiencing. They're like, I'm not even going to bring this up because I don't think anybody's talking about this. Like, if I didn't lose somebody else, like my loss, the loss of myself feels insignificant in comparison to that. But I think the loss of ourself, including the loss of what we thought our future was going to look like, is enormously huge, because we plot the course of our lives based around how we think things are going to go. And so for grief to come in and uproot or upend all of that, it's like, now all of this must change. I must recalibrate to this. And something that's also really hard that I've found and seen when I work with clients, especially when the loss is sudden or traumatic, is that I was a different person yesterday. When people have the time to anticipate a loss, or they know that somebody's going to die, they have a different experience of I'm losing myself in bits and pieces
Right.
as I'm anticipating their death. But for people who experience sudden and traumatic loss, it's like I became a new person overnight. I opened the box overnight.
Yep.
We were reassured by hospice that we had anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months with her, and she died in a week. And so to experience myself losing my mother, but then myself becoming a person who knew what death was intimately, seeing it in my house, writing an obituary, doing the memorial, all of these things that you do with death, it's like I have just lived so much life, and it came at me in 7 days. Like
Right.
it absolutely shattered anything. So one of the hardest things for grieving people, I think, to reckon with is like I was just there yesterday. I have a deep memory of this. It's not like I'm grieving a version of myself that happened a long, long time ago. It's like I remember that person. I remember their energy level. I remember their optimism. I remember what they were good at. I remember what they cared about. I remember what they dreamed of. I remember what they were passionate about. And now all of it's gone. All of it's dead. All of it's lost. That's terrifying. And so one of the first things I have people do is identify, I am grieving the person I used to be. So to say it out loud, to write it down, something that makes it concrete, and then ask this question of what is it exactly that you are grieving? I am grieving the dream of going to grad school. I'm grieving the amount of energy that I had. I am grieving the belief that the good guys always win. I am grieving on behalf of other people. So I'm grieving that, for instance, I worked with a man whose wife died by suicide, and he's like, I'm going to have all the conversations with her now about growing up as a woman in the world. And I never thought I was going to have to do that. And so all of a sudden that identity was thrust onto him. He's like, I'm grieving the innocence that I used to have about the fact that I wasn't going to have those
Right.
conversations. It's like now all that's on me. And so I'm grieving that for sure. And so to pinpoint all of these little losses, it can seem like a lot of pulling teeth or like I'm exacerbating your suffering. But in reality, naming the things we've lost is one of the best ways to honor them.
Yep.
When we're grieving the people that we used to be. And then another thing that I give grieving people a heap ton of permission to do is slightly shift the story that all is lost. Because this is a huge thing that we tell ourselves in the aftermath of grief is my person died, I went through divorce, I had a diagnosis, something terrible happened, I have lost. And so all is lost. I am lost. I'm not the same person I used to be. Nothing about my new life is familiar. And they speak, and I did this too after my mom died, which is why I can recognize it, in extremes. Never,
Right.
always, all of it, everything. And you can use that and it can be true for you. But I always just a little thumb pushback on clients that I work with of like, what if there was 1% of you that remained? What if there was 10% of you that remained? What if all is not lost, but most of it is lost? And there's a different story, there's a different mindset that we enter into when we approach everything in my life is different versus most of my life is different. It's like, okay, what in my life is the same as it was before? I do this exercise that's inspired by Oprah's column in her magazine called What I Know for Sure. And I always ask Grievous, I'm like, what do you know for sure? My truck is blue. My eyes are green. My cat's name is Gigi. I really like the Golden Girls. Like these are things that have not changed for a really long time for me. And you can even go as far back as when you were 5, when you were 10, when you were 20, when you were 30, however much time you have to go back and other losses that you have lived. What has remained consistent? Every time you've moved across the country, every time you've lost a pet, every time you've lost a relative, every time you've graduated or hit another milestone like a wedding or something like that, what pieces of you have stayed with you throughout the course of your life? I still really hate olives. And if that's the one truth that I'm hanging on to after my mom dies, so be it. I am still a person who hates olive. 1% is still true. 99% is different. Great. One thing I know for sure in my life after loss, we're not eating any olives. That's a good place to start. And
Right.
it seems funny and it seems trite.
Oh, but
But
it's
at the
so,
same time, drawing on these things of, oh, I've always been a creative person. Even if my creativity doesn't feel like it's here right now, I am still creative. Or I feel like I never want to live somewhere where the seasons never change. So like California. And so like, I know I'm going to stay in Chicago. So that's going to stay the same. And it's how I used to have this bedrock and foundation of certainty. I used to know what my life was. And now I'm standing on tiny pebbles. And each of those tiny pebbles is something solid that's underneath my feet that I didn't think I had before. It's the story of everything is gone versus most of it is gone. And
Yeah.
it takes us from catastrophizing and spiraling to, okay, this is what I know for sure. This 1%, this 12%, this 5% I can stand on. And this is what I will build up from in my life after loss. But there's so much in grieving the old self. It's like, we got to grieve the 99% and acknowledge the 1%, 5%, 12%, 20% that's still left from life after loss.
Right.
Grief has not taken all there is to you. It does not have that power.
Oh, I can't tell you how much I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think that I try to be a very, hope-filled person, but at the beginning I was not like that, and I probably was one of those all or nothing people that sat there and was like, everything is different, everything is gone, but like you said, it wasn't. I was still a mother. I was still different things, but I wasn't thinking about that then. And I wish I would have had somebody to go, okay, wait, there are still little things. And so focus on those little things for right now. Even like you said, I love olives. So I still love olives. You know what I mean?
You can have all my olives, and I'm not having any.
Yes. So, but I love that. And I think, it's something that seems, like you said, it may seem silly if you're looking at it on the outside, but just finding those little pieces when you feel like your whole world has shattered that are still holding you to the ground. Like they're even, whether it's a title that you still hold or something you still love or a show that you still watch, just to keep you that gravity, to keep you on the ground, just to keep on staying, I absolutely love that. And that's something that I haven't thought about, but I think that, and I wonder if you feel the same. I think it probably stems from a place of grief's anger and grief's, destruction. And so it makes you bitter sometimes. And it does have you do these, totalities of it's either this or this, black and white. It's either here or there,
Yes. Well, and I think the first thing that comes up for me, especially losing my mom at 21, which the older I get, the more that feels like a child. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, I could drink, but just barely. And I think something that grief does to us, no matter how old we are, especially like our first big loss, the first time we open the box of mortality, is that we immediately revert back to some kind of simplistic childhood thinking of either or. It's black and white, all or nothing, everything's gone or everything exists. They're alive and they're dead, because death is so black and white.
Right.
Death is so permanent. Death is so uncome back fromable. Like we can't bring people back from the dead. And so because death is so permanent, we're so convinced that everything about our life after loss is also permanent. And so we use that very heavy, weighty, permanent language to describe it. And so much of the work I like to do is to help people in their brains edit the story they tell themselves, so that extremist language just gets a little softer around the edges. I'm like, you can still tell that story, but what if we added just a little something to the end, or a little something to the beginning, or a little something underneath, so that there was a little more to stand on? And this is something I also spoke about with a client as well. I've gotten very nerdy about the Enneagram within the past year, and I have never explored the Enneagram up until this point, and the ways it applies to grief are wild, and that's a whole other conversation. But I'm an Enneagram 4, which means I feel things intensely deeply, and I'm really good at grief. I'm really good at melancholy. And something that I found that my clients seem to appreciate, that I know or have experienced myself about grief, it's like, I have to tell myself the story that this is absolutely true. Everything is gone. All is lost. I will never be the same again. I have to deeply feel that. I have to enter into despair about it in order to realize that it's not entirely true. It's 99% true. It's not 100% true.
Right.
It's 80% true. It's not 100% true. It's like I have to almost try that on like a big heavy garment to realize this is not entirely where I live. This is not the best fit for where I am right now in my life. And so I take it off and try on another piece of clothing. It's like, okay, most of that's true, but my shoes are the same, or my hat's the same, or my underwear's the same. It's like everything outside. It's like I'm constantly trying on, what is my story now? What am I telling myself now? What is true now? And sometimes we have to wear this story. Everything is gone, and we have to operate as if that is totally and completely true in order to recognize, hey, wait a minute, the clock is still telling time correctly. My sofa is still bright yellow. My cat still wants to be fed at 6 a.m. every morning, no matter what happens. The sun still comes up in the east, and it can be really basic ass stuff. And it's like I had to live that whole story. Everything is gone. I am desperately broken and can never be repaired. All is lost. I will never be the same. In order to recognize that that wasn't entirely true. And I think that's something that so many grievers need to experience. It's like, no, just let me try this on first. And then I need to realize that it doesn't fit in order to try something else on. Because what I never come in telling grievers, all is lost. No, it's not. How infantilizing is that to grieving people? And how frustrating is it as a griever to have your experience denied like that?
Yep.
I will never be the same. Oh, sure you will. And this is what so many people try and do to people who are grieving. I'm crazy. No, you're not.
Right.
But this is the experience I'm having right now. I'm crazy. I'm alone in this. This is going to last forever. I am permanently broken. If you negate any of that, then you're negating my experience as a griever, and that's not helpful to me.
Right.
But to say all is lost and to ask a question of like, what if 99% was lost as opposed to all of it? That's a different response than no, it's not. You're
Right.
not negating
Absolutely.
a person's grief experience. You're inviting them to have a different perspective or position on reality.
Oh, that's
or
good.
inviting them to tell a slightly different story. And when phrased as a question, it doesn't seem like I am negating your reality with a statement. It's like I'm issuing you an invitation to another way of seeing. And or shutting them down. Oh, that's so well phrased. Yeah, I don't want to turn off the story you're telling yourself. No, by all means, I just want to help you build on it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Big difference. That's the core of the work that I do in grief.
Yes. See, you guys need her. She is so great. Yes. I mean, that is just the thing, it reminds me of when, after my mother would pass, the number one thing people would say to me is, oh, she wouldn't, and people still say this, like, she wouldn't want you to be sad. She wouldn't want you. And I'm like, oh, how do you know? And also,
I want people to be sad when I die, please.
Yes. And like, it's okay. Like, I don't walk around every day crying. I'm 4 years into my mother passing away, and I have much more, reminiscence than sorrow now, although I still walk with a heavy pain, but just those things, like you said, is exactly what grieving people need. They just need to be seen and heard and invited to have it go however it goes without shutting it down, because we don't know necessarily what we need or where it's going to go. And so someone like I really love that. So, and I think, we can look at the comments. I think that's a great pausing point, because I hope everybody like zones that into their brain and really, reflects on that, because I think it's beautiful. So first, I just want to say hi to Susan and Christine, because they took the time to come in here and comment. And Susan said that she's definitely a veteran griever, and she's also attended grief and loss group. She lost her mom at 44. And after a little bit of an estrangement, and they reconnected, and she eventually lost her mom in 2007 to dementia. And she talks a little bit about how she grieved her mother, and now she's currently grieving her daughter's cancer diagnosis. And she's so grateful for your two books, because they help her walk through both different kinds of grief. And that is a good point that Susan makes, is that these books, is in Permission to Grieve. Shelby does talk about her personal path with grief, but both, especially Your Grief Your Way, both of these books are not grief specific, about just a parent loss, but they really help you go through your own grief journey, however that may look and whatever that might be like. And so that's just so beautiful. You'll have to go back in and read Susan's comments, because they're just such a tribute to Shelby's work and the great things that she's doing. And I real quick, and we'll wrap it up because we went over and I don't want to take up all your time, but how do you, do you internalize the work that you're doing and the impact that you have on all of these people? Because it's so beautiful. And, it's just, I hope that I ask this to everybody, because obviously I reached out to you because, you had provided me some inspiration and comfort and just encouragement and, through your work. And so I just wonder, do you eternalize it, and do you feel proud of yourself? Because I'm proud of you.
Oh, that's a lovely question. I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that before either. So thank you for bringing 2 new questions to the space tonight. I think
While you're thinking, hi, Tony.
don't know that hi, Tony. I don't know that I have a problem being proud of myself. I think I'm actually really good at that. I think I struggle to remember to. It's kind of like schedule in time to feel proud. And that feels very like strange to say out loud. It's like schedule in time to be proud of yourself. But it's almost like, and I don't know if you resonate with this in your work as well, but it's like the work of grief happens so fast and the work of grief is so prevalent. It's always happening. It's not like tax season where there's like a season and then there's not. It's like grief is always in season.
Yes.
And so I'm almost always doing the work of grief, or I'm always thinking about grief or thinking about how I can make things from grief and loss. And I rarely sit back and reflect on the things that have already happened. And so I actually have a practice that I use from one of my first employers, perhaps, or maybe even a course that I took in college on resume writing that recommended this. But either way, here's a tip that you can take with you off today is at whatever job you have, or even just in your personal email accounts, I always make a folder that just says keepers. And anytime somebody emails me to thank me for the work that I'm doing, anytime somebody shares their story of grief and loss and says this helped so much, anytime somebody writes me a really nice review, wherever it is, Amazon, Yelp, Facebook, wherever good reviews can be written, I will just file it away. And in seasons when I'm really sad, or when I'm pausing to like take vacations or spend time with my partner or things like that, I will often visit this folder and just come back and be like, see, the work you do is important. The work you do is needed. There are people who have been helped by your work. And so at times, especially when I'm feeling drained creatively, or even when I'm just like resting and surveying the land of everything that's happened. I started this business in 2016 and it's now 2021. So about 5 years now of work. It's so helpful to go back and remember. It's like, I'll remember that story. I'll remember that person, and they've come so far. And so to watch their journeys as I watch mine also, and to know that my grief is evolving alongside theirs. And it's also fascinating too, to be a person in the grief space because of my experience with loss. And I think this is about how 99% of people get into doing grief work, is that they experience a loss themselves. And so part of the pride also, the tangly kind of dark bit, is also, would my mother be proud of me? And that's a weird thing to weave in, because I'm like, well, I don't know. I wouldn't even be doing this work if she was alive.
Oh, yes.
And so it's hard to envision and it's hard to picture. So the older that I've gotten and the more I've done this work, she and I have come up with like little symbols together for people who believe in signs and symbols. And on days when I find money on the ground, like a penny, I will generally take that as a sign that whatever is happening that day, or whatever thought I just had, or whatever way I was missing her in that day, she says, I see you, I'm proud of you, I love you. Those are like the 3 resounding statements that she says to me, which is why I close my podcast with all of them too. I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because there are things I feel like I needed to hear from her in life, and I still need to hear them from her in death. And some of these signs and symbols are the only way. So it's like, I find ways to be proud of myself and actually internalize what I do and the impact that it's having. And also in that, there's a podcast episode I released called The 1% of Grief Rule. In all the joy, there will always be 1% of grief. There's a part of me that misses my mom and wonders if she would be proud of me too. And I will never know the answer to that question. And so within my own experience of being proud of myself, that's always an undercurrent that lives under there.
Right. Oh, and it makes me tear up a little bit, because I resonate with all of that so much. And, it's never lost on me when someone says that my work resonates with them, or that a piece, that they loved, because I know that the people that are following my page are there because they also have experienced some kind of grief or hardship or heartbreak. And just like you, I'm always wondering, if my mom would be proud. And so I'll say the same thing to you that I think of as all these people all the time, you know, random strangers will say, your mother would be so proud of you. And like you, it's like, I think she would, but do I actually know that? I don't. And so what I do know is that my mother was always so proud when other people were proud of me. And so I bet your mom was probably the same as a mother. You know, if other people are proud of you, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, your daughter is doing this. And so I think that, you know, having impacted other people's lives, I think it would be there. But like you know, we don't know, we can't say for certain, but you're just doing beautiful work, and you're extending her legacy beyond what she probably ever could have imagined. And so keep shining, keep doing the work that you're doing, because it truly is helping the world. And I can't wait for your third book and to see what's happening. And I'm going to give you my address, maybe get a early release copy.
Yes, I hope so. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited.
Yeah. So, well, I just really appreciate your time. I will put all the links to your social media, how to purchase your book, how to listen to your podcast. There's several of them. And just a quick hi to Erica too, and Shayna for tuning in, and everybody else that has watched. And I just thank you so much, Shelby. Is there any last words you want to leave with?
Yes, one is practical, and then the other one is kind of a benediction or a blessing. If you buy the books, just a disclaimer that Permission to Grieve does have swear words in the first 2 chapters.
Yep.
That's the only negative review I've gotten for it on Amazon from a 60-year-old woman who's like, I can't stand the swear words, I'm returning this. So if you can't do grief and swear words, don't buy this one, and maybe don't give it to children. But Your Grief Your Way is swear word free. And this is a little more dive in, dive out, daily devotional style, and Permission to Grieve is meant to read all the way through. Not in one sitting, you're not under pressure to do that. But please always, where you can, support your local libraries. It is carried at local bookstores as well.
Yes.
So if you put it on order, you can get it delivered straight to you. Oftentimes they will ship as well. And then they're both available as audiobooks too. If you like to listen to the sound of my voice.
Yes,
you can certainly do that as well.
You guys will. Her voice is so soothing. Listen to her podcast. It is just, I mean, oh yes, you guys have to, like, I almost want to just get it on an audiobook, just listen to you read it. So
thank you. And thanks to everyone watching today. We are in a time of unprecedented grieving. Not only are we all grieving things at a global level, we all know that we're grieving, thinking 24-hour news cycle, thinking never really being able to turn off the awareness that grief exists. And so just please be gentle with yourself as much as you possibly can. Give yourself as much permission to grieve as you need. This is something I've been having to do, especially in the last 2-3 weeks or so here in the United States. Is just heap on the permission. If I could have permission to do, be, feel, want anything right now, what would it be? Sometimes it's a nap. Sometimes it's to cry. Sometimes it's to be anxious for no reason at all, is the story I tell myself in my head. I'm like, what if you just allowed that to be true? And so giving you all that permission to grieve tonight. And thanks for tuning in live. I love seeing comments and things flow in throughout. I really appreciate it.
yeah. Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Shelby. And this video will be able to be viewed at any time. It'll save in my Facebook videos. It'll also be up on my YouTube channel. And so, yeah, just thank you. I hope you guys, took notes and loved this as much as I did. And again, all of her stuff will be in the comment section. So thank you, everybody. Good night.